Hello, everyone. It's almost end of the day. Thank you for sticking, and thank you for your patience to hear our interesting conversation. So I would like to call my fellow panelist and invite Caroline Ray. She's a regional director for Africa, Arab East Africa. Can you please give a round of applause? Thank you. Anyway. The next panelist, I would like to call upon Gurmukh Singh, who is the Vice Chair of Kenya Green Building Society. A round of applause for him, please. Welcome. Leander Moons, Founding Partner, Studio OMT Architects. Leander, welcome. And lastly, Dean Landy, Group Head of Urban Planning and Design, Rendezvous. Welcome, Dean. Great. So we are very excited about this. We have had a chat. We thought that we will have a 30-minute briefing session. We spoke for almost 45 minutes. So I'm hoping that this is going to be exciting for you as well. Today we are going to talk about learning from tradition and traditional urban planning practices and what can be adopted, what is obsolete in the current context, and how can we use some of that knowledge to push the frontiers of urban design and planning. So with that, I would like to start with the big picture question for Caroline. So Caroline, you have been in the region for 13 years, and there's a lot of lessons that you've gained throughout the practice. Could you share what are the traditional design practices, if any, that can be adopted in the future planning practices and the growth of the cities as urbanization is happening? Are there any lessons that are relevant for the current times and the way the urbanization is happening in the region?
Okay, thanks, and good afternoon, everybody. I think the way planning was done 50, 60, 70 years ago in our African cities was very much based on the sort of European town planning approaches, and obviously obvious reasons for that. Stephen Jennings made a comment this morning that something went wrong with our planning 50 years ago. I'm not sure if it's the planning that went wrong or if it's the implementation of the planning, because that's a very different thing. Within our master plan developments or new cities today, we clearly do need to have very strong master plans. We need to have very strong design guidelines. But I think if we rely purely on the systems and approaches that were used previously, we'll get a bit left behind from sort of what today's needs are. We need to take into account in our planning the planetary challenges that we face, looking at the green space, biodiversity gain, how can we actually use our master plan developments to increase connectivity, biodiversity corridors through the built environment. We need to look at urban heat island and other effects which are going to be facing us more and more, and adjust our typical planning rules in order to take those into account and try and design better for the future. But at the same time, I think it's one thing to look at kind of planning within the boundary of our own development, but our developments don't happen in isolation. We're generally sort of connected to other existing and rapidly changing built environments. And so I think we need to acknowledge that our own developments are going to end up by affecting the areas around us. They're not just isolated. They'll have a ripple effect into surrounding areas. And whilst sometimes the implementation of planning rules and regulations within our kind of governance structures and municipal structures is a bit challenged in the way it's implemented or sort of governed, we can actually use our own developments as a way to shape the future of the wider city, not just our own development. And what I love to talk to people about is that understanding of the context in which one particular project is happening, that ripple effect, what beneficial effect it can have on the neighbourhood around, how it can be used to actually shape that future urban development in the municipality or the broader urban space. So I think we need to be a bit creative, both within the planning in our own developments, but also in sort of leveraging the benefits that development can have on the broader environment, and making sure that we're not sort of treating each development that we're involved in isolation, but as part of that ecosystem of urbanization and accommodating the wider population and influencing, good practice for the wider population around. Don't know if that answers the question, but that's my view. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, it absolutely does. And you rightly said, those understanding, those interlinkages, it's so important, because we are not just building with those boundaries, we are building for the future where there will be a lot more intersection of the society and the development. And having that lens is so important, because, society needs to grow with that creative mindset and not like in those blocks. So it's important that we start not just planning, but also the governance systems in the same format. You mentioned about design guidelines, that they are very important and they play a role in how really the community is going to shape. So on that note, Dean, I would like to ask you a question. This morning we heard that there is so much. You have so many projects across Africa, and from all the projects that you have done and you have been a part of, what are the key lessons from those urban design lessons that are not Europe centric, and that is helping to influence how the developments shape with the current context and the ambitions of the region, and how they will shape the lives of the region?
So maybe just a quick snapshot of the context of what my role is as the Head of Urban Planning and Design at Rendeavour, which, if you heard Stephen Jennings speak this morning, that is across the Rendeavour portfolio. So 6 new cities, or 7, but we're actively working on 6 new cities across Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and Democratic Republic of Congo. So I just highlight that to talk about how we can look at these things at scale. But the reality is, we can talk around, it sounds quite easy to be able to talk about creating a city, but in reality, the best cities in the world have taken many, many decades, if not centuries, to evolve, and they build on layers upon layer, and they build a sense of soul and character and culture in those places. So what I guess my role at the moment is to not think we can basically take a piece of Melbourne, where I'm from, or take a piece of development we've seen in Dubai or from America or anything like that. It's about trying to create a framework, which I'm using a model which I've developed called the Livable Cities Framework, which actually puts some rigour around a thought process to create at least the foundation of a livable, vibrant, sustainable city. Because I'm not kidding ourselves to think that we can create something that in its first layer is going to be a perfect city, but we've got to start with the foundation of all the elements that make up a city, and it will evolve at a commercial pace. So we're not trying to build instant cities in the Rendeavour portfolio, or we'll use Tatu as an example. It'll take many decades to build. But the part we're focused on now, and Peter's here as one of our urban designers, is to try and add layers to the city. So for those that have heard of Tatu for the last number of years, in reality we've been working on the light industrial areas and some housing. That's generated jobs and it's generated housing. But what we're focused on now is creating the foundation of a city. So the model I use is to break a city down to what I call the soft and hard elements of the place. So the soft elements are the parts that I find often get overlooked. It's how you put a strategy around understanding culture and building a local economy, how you create a safe, walkable place, how you can build things out in time. So all there's 10 elements that we work through to try and understand how you build the soft infrastructure of a city. And then the hard elements we're also consciously working on as well. The hard elements are kind of the bricks and mortar we know of a city. And once again, we're not trying to plug in what we've seen elsewhere. And sometimes I'm asked the question of my approach to new urbanism, or are we trying to take a different type of urbanism and put it into Africa? And my answer is it's not that. We're just implementing classical urbanism, or good urbanism. You need to go back a few centuries before the car was dominating our cities, and think how we can create cities and places for people. So in parallel, to go to some examples, in Tatu, for instance, we're working on projects in these hard elements around culture, around retail, housing, commercial, entertainment, community infrastructure. All of these things need to be happening in parallel. There's some amazing projects coming through the pipeline where we're looking to create wildlife sanctuaries, entertainment, live districts for sports and entertainment and so on. So we're consciously working through these elements that creates a city, knowing that our role as urban designers and architects is to add a couple of layers to the onion, you can say. And it's going to take local communities, different businesses, different developers, different designers, so many people over so many years to really build that tapestry of a city. So I think it's a very, very exciting discussion we can have in this sort of forum of how we can each play our part to help create cities. But cities are such a complex organism that has so many inputs from economic to social, culture and so on, that we can all play a part in building a strong foundation. In the Rendeavour portfolio, across all of those cities, they're all at different levels of development. So it's a real privilege from my perspective to be able to be generating strategies around walking and cycling, around sports and events to start things happening there. We're doing marathons and cycling events, concerts, music events. So all of these things to build the soft infrastructure of a city. And the best thing we can do is provide the platform to allow community to come together, to engage heavily with the existing local communities so people feel there's a sense of ownership. Because as Stephen said this morning, the communities have been there a long time before us and they'll be there for a long time after us. Not a rush to go anywhere. It's a 20, 30, 50-year process. So the short answer to the question there is how we can be mindful, not that creating cities are simple, but we need to break it down to a simple thought process of the hard and soft elements to truly create a target around healthy, sustainable, livable, vibrant cities, because those terms get thrown around a lot. And that was, in essence, I spent 4 years researching and writing a book on the topic because I found that those phrases were getting thrown around too easily. We're the most livable city. And you could ask someone, okay, so what are you doing to consciously create or achieve that target? And there was no strategy, it was just a good catchphrase. So I'm really driven to implement more than a catchphrase of, if you've heard Tatu talked about, it's live, work and play. So a lot of our work is putting the meat on the bone to what does that actually look like and what are the things that we're doing to make it truly a city to live, work and play.
Thank you so much. This reminds me of a book I read many, many years ago of sustainable neighborhoods, because that talks about how different functions really create the tapestry of urban area or a city. And that's, as you mentioned, that you're trying to engage different architects, local people, because that also leads to the process of creating jobs and really lifting the economy up. So excellent, thank you. I think my next question I want to ask Leander, but before I come to you, Leander, I have a question for Gurmukh. Gurmukh, you have lived your life here, and you have a very interesting role. You have an architecture firm, and you're also vice chair of Kenya Green Building Society. So with these two different roles, where you sort of become a regulator in some way by designing policies and practices and influencing how governments form their policies, and with your role as an architect as well, how do you really shape the urban fabric, and how do you support the organizations like Rendeavour who are coming on board to bring that expertise in and then define how the city is going to grow in the future? Okay. What does that engagement look like?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's interesting wearing two hats basically on this. So in terms of KGBS, we have a lot of engagement regarding education, general public, government entities, and there's a I mean, we've spent some time trying to get government institutions certified. So we've got like Mombasa County, Nairobi County Governor's Office was certified. So these are forming examples, as Caroline had mentioned earlier. You do need to have some projects that can create precedent and kind of influence the broader projects around them. A good example is also like Vezingara, and that's changing urban renewal basically of that space. So there's a policy aspect. There's trying to create incentives, obviously from counties, and that's through KGBS, and so there's incentivizing green buildings, highly sustainable buildings, net zero buildings, buildings that recycle water, because water shortages due to the massive urban demand on cities like Nairobi. Things like your aquifers start depleting. So how do you now factor that into your day-to-day use? Are you rainwater harvesting? Are you recycling your grey water? So those kind of policies are starting to get built in as a response not only to sustainable needs, but also just to practical needs as well, because now there's shortage of water. So that's on the policy side. Education side, as I mentioned, the certification, which we keep on pushing forward for, that forms a metric for measuring sustainability. Obviously, it has to be sensible as well. Now, coming down to actually now how that mixes with the architectural side of things. So even when we are designing, we look at many aspects. So we do a broad range of projects, starting from thousands of acres down to individual buildings or interiors. So if you're looking at, let's say, any East African city, there is a tendency to now start getting very dense. And that you need to have infrastructure supporting that. But at the same time, you're having problems with drainage. Your placemaking is starting to get, it's moving away from proper placemaking, and it's just moving towards just high densification. And something that Dean had mentioned as well is placemaking is important. So if we kind of miss that out, it'll be a problem. So we try to, within our projects as well, try to implement placemaking, try to make them examples, leading examples within those. Try to reduce urban effects, basically. And I mean, we try to do this as much as possible. Introduce green spaces so they can start recharging the aquifer. Reduce your strain on city infrastructure as well regarding stormwater. So all of these measures are important for this. Now, in terms of other aspects covering sustainability, there's also things like climate resilience. Now, Nairobi typically is I'm referencing Nairobi because I'm born here and I've lived here all my life, but Nairobi is in a very good climate. However, and most of the buildings do not need, for example, forced ventilation and things like that. However, as the climate is keeping on changing, we need to ensure that we keep on designing more passively. And following up on the title of this panel session is kind of going towards tradition where we're following, well-shaded buildings, well-oriented buildings, and that's very important for any infrastructure or architectural project that we do within the region. They have to be contextualized. They have to kind of be as passive as possible, I think that covers.
Thank you. Yeah, I think climate-sensitive design is something that is now needed across the globe, no matter which country we are in. And unfortunately, the heat is not bearing any region, so we all have to adapt. I do have another follow-up questions to anyone on the panel, but then I'll first come to Leander. Leander, you have been innovating since past so many years, and you have a service or product which is new to the market. Or can you talk a little bit about the timber construction? We've had this conversation before about like how it's valuable, and especially coming to what Gurmukh said about climate resilience, something which is, we know that timber construction is resilient that way, but from the perspective of resource availability, which we discussed earlier. So if you can just shed some light and help the audience to understand what that looks like, the applicability, and the future for it.
Yes, thank you.
And how it can shape the urban communities.
No, exactly. And I think before I go into timber construction, I actually want to tie in with some of my colleagues here. Of course, urban planning, like we have a big focus on getting the public spaces done. We have a big focus on infrastructure, on accessible space making. And what we often forget is like the space beyond that. Like how does the community actually take shape? Because the community takes shape in semi-public spaces. And I think that is where is the key in a good city growth. Like how can we grow cities is, as Dean said, it's like a process of generations of growth, organic growth often. So the infrastructure, if we lay it out like a Manhattan grid, it's going to fail. It needs to be a strategy which can be adaptable to the needs of the communities. And then we talk about sustainability. And here I come to the timber, which is often, implemented on infrastructure, on the greenery, but then we build with concrete. So how sustainable are we then really? So what we do as an office, and we try to find like clients who support that, is to take a step further and think about like, how can we be innovative in the way we design cities, in the way we design buildings, and that starts, of course, with the material. Concrete is the biggest contributor to climate change, and we still keep building with it. But there's a big social component to it, and then we're back to, how do we shape a community? Especially here in Africa, there is an enormous opportunity with the population growth ahead to change the way we build, to change it for the better, and to change it to something we can produce locally. And this is timber. Interestingly, if you look back, there's a lot of talk about China, how China has advanced, and that was through concrete. Before that, the US advanced, that was through steel. And both countries, they built up a lot of wealth in the population, generational wealth by home ownership. We have an enormous opportunity in Africa to do the same with an African material like timber, which we can locally grow and can contribute to wealth in further generations. So I think that is where we are coming from. Now the challenges, of course, we face is like, how do we tell that people who see timber as an inferior building material? And that takes time. In Fumba town, where we are doing some of the master planning and some of the timber construction, it took around 10 years to now finally, actually this month or last month, to complete our first affordable 4-story high timber building. And that was because before nobody wanted to take the risk with their little money they had to buy something in a material they didn't know. So it was through buildings which were, for the high-end market, where then local people started to see, like people with money are actually investing this material. That maybe is also for me an interesting opportunity. It took 10 years for people to actually go over that threshold and to now be investing in timber building, in sustainable construction, and to actually also see that value chain which we're trying to set up in Tanzania, where we have a lot of wood, but we don't have an industry just yet, like that value chain which could be like initiated by creating demand could also lead to local value and to therefore more jobs and a local production chain which is also more sustainable. So I think that is really where we are coming from as an office, as our mindset. But we can only do that when we also design nice buildings and when we create communities with those buildings within a good urban setting.
Thank you so much. I think value chain conversations are always interesting and important because in the past we have almost worked on transactional basis, and that's where the opportunity is missed to create value for the next whole stakeholder and the stakeholders that are going to come in the future, because we just don't know when they are going to come. So I had a question before, but I will ask another question first. We all agree that walkability, livability is the key component of urban design and for our future communities. Beyond policy and incentive, what is the opportunity that you see in the market that can help, we can take the case of Nairobi since we're in Nairobi, help some area in Nairobi to become like a model development? So open-ended question to anyone who would like to take.
I think one of the first principles of good urban planning, as I said before, is going back to classical urban planning. I'll always just start with in the master plans with Rendezvous is that walkable catchment. So that 400-metre walkable radius out to 800 metres in communities like we are here, where people are more accepting of walking, is the first real step. And I think being able to do that in a greenfield type development, as we are in Tartu City, gives us a bit more of a blank canvas where we can do a network. I call it basically this idea of a city of villages. Rather than thinking we just have to do one CBD, we can create a connected network of urban villages which can have all of those daily needs: the school, the shops, the medical centre, cafes, etc. And then we can do density around that to do density well. I think the challenge I see in a lot of African cities, or if we just take Nairobi here, we're getting the density, but it's not density done well. So there's no minimum standards for apartment design, for instance. So you're getting buildings that are hard up against each other with just light courts or light scoops, so really poor amenity for the apartment itself. But in terms of the urban planning part, it needs to be done with some intentionality, because there's no open space, there's no good parks, there's no space for people to sit and have enjoy fresh air. I find it interesting on the road, if everyone knows the thicker superhighway there, I think it's near one of the universities, there's an interchange on a freeway, and there's a section of grass with a few trees in it. So this is a freeway interchange, except on a nice day you'll see people sitting underneath the trees, just because there is no other alternative for good quality open space. So I think my real focus is getting the balance right. To be able to create compact, walkable urbanism means it generates healthier lifestyles, jobs are closer, it supports a local economy, because then you're going to have people within that proximity to support the retail aspect. So they all tie together. And a lot of the challenges I see in urban planning is when it's done too much in silos, that housing goes there, retail goes there. I refer to it like colour by numbers. If you remember kids' books, you just colour certain uses by the number, but good urban planning doesn't work that way. It needs to be mixed use. And even in our planning controls, we're upgrading within Tartu as well with our team to put a lot more intentionality around a minimum standard. So we're setting new guidelines to prevent the worst development, but also putting mechanisms in place to encourage design excellence. So we might say there's a 10-storey height limit, for instance, but with design excellence, we might allow that to go to 12 or 13 stories if the developer's providing a good quality urban square, or design excellence from an architecture or sustainability perspective. So I think getting the outcomes for good quality might be timber buildings. We might allow them to go taller if they're going to do something that raises the bar from sustainability. So we've got to find ways as city builders to find the mechanisms to encourage excellence but raise the bar on bad development, because there's no shortage of giving examples of bad development, and there's no use just pointing the finger of where things aren't going great. I think the best thing we can do in our industry is lead by example and try and show the right design guidelines, the right master plans, the correct built form outcomes, the right sorts of materials, green architecture, and show by example will be the best way to do it. And that will be then, I'm not sure if anyone heard Margat's presentation this morning saying, why is Africa not seen as leading in certain areas? And I do see the opportunity to leapfrog bad urban development. I don't want to copy models of the US, of mega mall shopping centres. Tartu, for instance, won't have a shopping mall. It will have good urban streets, a street-based retail centre. There will be no mega Mall of Kenya or anything like that. So we're flipping it back on its head to go back to good quality streets, retail centres, etc. So that will make a big difference.
If I may just add on that, some good examples, if you look at Nairobi CBD as well, Aga Khan Walk is well known. I mean, it's currently, you have running battles going on right now over there, but it's well known because it's a very walkable street. And even if you look like places like Westlands, you have Woodville Grove, which is very activated by, walkability. It could be better. I mean, if you made Woodville Grove entirely pedestrianized, for instance, for the people who know it, it would really activate a lot of the uses over there. And an example of one done badly is Kilimani, for example, another area in Nairobi where the streets don't have any oversight or activity onto them. leading to them being a very well-designed walkways, but they're not used because people find them unsafe. No one's overlooking onto them. There's no activity onto them. And that's very critical. You need to create that sense of security. There's a book called Defensible Spaces, which is very useful. And same thing for affordable housing. You need to have hierarchy of spaces. Your density shouldn't be too high, so you can have social cohesion. So the social aspects are very critical for any urban setting, and they can make or break how walkable it is and how livable it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just perhaps one small point. Just to remember that we have walking cities at the moment. The vast majority of our populations, I think the statistic is something like 60% or something in Nairobi at least, are walking from their home to their place of work because they can't afford any alternative. They don't afford public transport. They certainly aren't the car users. So we have walkers in our city. We have walking cities, but we generally speaking don't make good provision for them. And I think again, where we have influence in our engagements with public sector, supporting authorities around our own urban developments, we shouldn't be just trying to plan within our own cities, but perhaps try and have a ripple effect outside so that the connectivity for that vast majority of the population coming into your city are probably going to be walking. And so, what provision is there within the city, and how safe is it for them to be walking home at the end of their shift in the call centre or factory or whatever it is at Tartu City? So, it's not that we don't have walking in our cities. It's quite the opposite. The majority of people do walk. We just don't have good provision for them.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as planners, we do understand the value of walking and how it leads to creating a community culture and social cohesion, as you mentioned, Gurmukh. I wonder, thank you first of all to answer the question on the brownfield side, because I think it's easier to manage the infrastructure, relatively easier. I won't say it's easier, relatively easier to manage the infrastructure or the design when it's a greenfield site. Expo City is also a greenfield site. And it becomes more complicated when there are different stakeholders, different actors involved to activate those streets. With that in mind, as planners, we understand how activating streets could also be a project in its own and what goes into it. So with that, if we can take the example of the same road, what is the opportunity that looks like to create activation around that road? Assuming that the government policies or the regulations will take their own course of time, assuming the incentives will come in place when they will, what does the immediate activity look like? Is there something that the community can do? Is there something that, the neighborhood, association can do? So that we can really, as citizens of the city, as citizens, we can really push the design in the direction that can make society more comfortable to live in.
Okay, so I'm going to cite a very good example in South Africa. There's a company called South Point that basically started rehabilitating the old CBD and converting old office blocks into student housing. Now that's a model that can work really well for our Nairobi CBD, for instance. And what Dean had mentioned, mixed use. We can have student housing at the top, activate the streets, make the ground floors, buzzing retail activity, nightlife activity, basically, which services, and you have a massive population from the universities, a young, vibrant population that is close to the university campuses. They can use the spaces. So our Nairobi CBD as it is currently is ripe for urban renewal. And I think these conversions can be used very cleverly to make some, a profitable model for developers. It can be done by private developers. And it can be done in a way that actually, improves the urban fabric of these CBDs. Again, I'm just mentioning that. Obviously, there's certain problems in some of the newer developments, as Dean had mentioned as well. Like in Westlands, you have buildings which are 5 meters apart, but 20 floors up. So there is a certain level of enforcement that is required by the government as well. So it's a part played by private and government players, but I think there is opportunity for private players to make a massive impact on this without relying too heavily on government.
Interesting. I think this is more like a call for the audience and everyone else that, if you have an innovative business idea that can really expedite that urban renewal, probably this is the time to go into it and explore that. I think I'll come back to you. Yeah. Yes.
One quick point to it. It brought back to my mind, I remember I walked around the streets of Eldoret with the governor at the time, saying there was such low-hanging fruit to improve the quality of the city because the streets were very narrow and there's thousands of people, as you were saying, it's a walkable culture, but there was cars all squeezing down there. I said, if we just close some of these east-west laneways across the city, it would just add so much more value to the city. And I think what developers can do, to go into your point there, is there's two things I love to see happen in cities. There's that term of tactical urbanism, if that phrase has been used here much, where you can do small interventions to test closing a section of a street and just showing people that your business is not going to fail if the car park isn't right out the front. And you can do little tests like that. I think the counties could be doing here to just improve the quality of streets. But I think the one thing that a lot will miss is the increase in property values. So sometimes you can talk about we need footpaths in and trees and it can seem too hard. But if you flip the conversation to say the increase in property values that are based in good quality streets with a nice footpath and street canopy trees and some seating will actually serve to raise property values and will create better places for community. But if you're boiling it down to commercial realities, good quality streets raise property values, and they don't need to be big interventions to improve those spaces. Just some continuous footpaths and street trees can be the starting point, and it's not big cost relatively.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's so much effort that goes into populating a development, like activating streets and encouraging people to gather at some place so that actually businesses can benefit from it. But if there is already a lot of footfall, that's an opportunity for everyone. And probably it should be the first motivation point for the government as well, to probably in support of what Gurmukh said, to go for urban renewal, because the value of that area will naturally go up. So I want to connect Caroline's point on the walkability of with 60% walking culture. And from the urban design perspective, what do you see can be done to encourage the government, to encourage different pardon me, I don't know if the ownership of lands is entirely with government or there are different individual owners across. But how can the government be encouraged to connect these dots, to encourage that there is last mile connectivity, or at least good connectivity between different developments, so that people have that choice, because having the choice is the first step of creating a better life for people. So how can we create that choice by good urban design principles and encouraging different mobility options across the city? Does that make sense? Anyone?
Happy to answer again. I think it's got to be brought back to a language that government or developers understand. I think if we talk about it from designers, we might say it'll just be a much more beautiful street, and that's true. But if it can come back to saying Kenyan roads have some of the worst statistics around pedestrian deaths and so on. So Tatu, for instance, the rules we've put in place around speed limits and stopping at a stop sign literally, or you get fined on the spot, some of those things might seem trivial, but I think putting it back in that aspect of, number one, improving safety. So, try and ride a bike through many parts of Nairobi. You're taking your life into your own hands. But you only need to look at many European cities or any cities, a lot of cities around the world. The culture is there and ready to be using e-bike systems and micromobility services, but we don't have the safety to ride a bike through most streets, and we don't have the footpaths to use an e-scooter. So there are other ways to be able to talk about it. So if we don't have a good public transport system, then we should be talking about ways to enable micromobility. It's very cheap, and yes, there'll be a cohort that still need to walk from a cost perspective, but an e-scooter or an e-bike can revolutionise mobility of a city. It can reduce congestion and some of those sort of big picture things, but you've still got to come back to safe paths and being able to commercialise it so that it is viable. So I think it becomes a language discussion around safety and increasing property values to encourage developers to want to do that as well. And I'm talking urban regeneration, not greenfield, because greenfield's a different thing. That's easy. But urban regeneration, there's so much opportunity if we just take Nairobi for an example. And I know there's some players coming into the market. We've seen EB, and there's others coming in now around micromobility. But there needs to be an improvement in the street infrastructure to support that.
Leander.
And maybe to add to that, I think the security question and the complexity that brings to our cities here is making this a challenge. And this is where I think like the new cities can really contribute, because through the new cities we can show with different security approaches how we can do this differently, and we can learn from that and see, on a community level again, can we start implementing that? Can we start to combine some of these compounds and we get the best of their amenities, and we can start to have our kids walking around between them, and that is like how we can then slowly implement it. I think there is not a golden bullet like where we can change the African city, which is very much like congested. A lot of like our infrastructure is just to go from A to B, and there is no activation of the street in large portions of our city. It's not something which we can just change like that. Europe is built very differently, so I think we have to take that into account and see, how can new cities still keep the African culture, the African community, but can we do something about this security issue? I think with that we can then change the whole cities as a whole.
About perception, you mentioned in our previous conversation, it was in relation to the timber construction, but yeah, it's about the perception of the people of different stakeholders towards certain practices and how we approach the issue. So I think with that we have. Do we still have time?
I think we have time for one or two quick questions.
Okay.
Maxwell, are you in the room? Because I saw you submitted on the app, and we were having an issue, and you had a good question, so I wanted to make sure you got to ask it, and then we'll get one more person, and we'll come back to you.
All right, thank you. I'm Maxwell Maida. My question is, how much thought is given to issues of inclusivity with the new cities that are coming up? Because I think we've seen most of them are targeting middle income to high earners and leaving out the poor who surrounds the new cities. I don't know, as urban planners and architects, how much thought is given into that process? Thank you.
Maybe we can take these three quickly, and then we can divvy them up among you.
I mean, I can start with that. So as I said, we just finished our affordable housing, first affordable housing in timber in Zanzibar just recently. And I think this is something where developers really come into play. A lot of the developers, of course, they're focusing mainly on where is the high yield. So they are going to markets where it's high yield. And then we leave the affordable housing to governments. And I hope, I'm only an architect, but we hope to see that developers take diversity, inclusivity really serious. And that especially when we develop new cities, that we not develop those only for the rich. That is critical for them to work. And also, like we were talking about mixed use has to go beyond only function, jobs and housing, but only through the housing we need to have that diversity and that rich mix of very wealthy, which we need to pay for the infrastructure, so that then also those who have less wealth can benefit from that. So I think that is critical for any new city.
And can I just quickly build on to that? As Caroline also mentioned earlier, that we have to look beyond the boundaries and look at that intersectionality. And it's a process. It does not happen right away. It takes time. But I think it's a learning for every stakeholder, whether it's the government, whether it's a developer or the community itself. Just that a mixed use will happen over a time. And yeah.
Really short answer is, if I use Tatu as an example, we're very intentional about that. So I look at the housing transect. Remember, I was talking before, making sure we get all of the elements of a vibrant city in parallel. So all at once, we're working on affordable housing through to very exclusive housing and everything in between. So partnering with developers to do as affordable a housing product as we can. And then there's townhouse type products, then there's standalone family homes, and we have a whole sliding scale. Because at the same time, we may have a big business that comes in and you have an executive that wants a premium house, but we're also very mindful with 25,000 jobs in the city, we need location and places for key worker housing. And the other little detail is, for Tatu, it's not a walled, gated city. So we sit side by side with a more informal settlement, and a big portion of our workforce is from there. So that's even more affordable, and they can probably build at a rate that we can't even get down to in those informal settlements, but they're literally on our doorstep and there's no fence in between. It's a blurred boundary. So I think any new city needs to be able to stitch into its surrounding context and play its part in that housing transect so that it's truly a mixed income city from the beginning.
Okay, I'm Kimaro from Zanzibar Presidential Delivery Bureau. I like your inputs when you say that the cities have to be intra-connected and interconnected. But I'm looking at the statistics that were presented in the morning, and I've been following up in terms of like demographics and the migration issues, that we are going to have 60% of people living in urban areas and 60% living in unplanned settlements. And now you are going to have these smart cities in different spots of urban areas. I was just wondering, as developers, what would be your recommendation on how to upscale the unplanned areas? Because one of the challenges that's going to come in the future, fast forward 20, 25 years, by 2050, it's inequality, it's also safety issues, and yes, you can get labor now from the neighboring areas where the projects are ongoing. But when we talk about the welfare and the future and safety of even the people living and properties developed in the smart cities, you also want to consider the surrounding areas. You also want to consider how being like maybe social accountable. I know I'm talking from maybe the government perspective, but I think being developers, you can also offer some solutions and possible actions that can be taken to also consider and looking at these other areas that are unplanned in cities. Thank you.
Dean, let me take that one actually. So we actually, our firm did the affordable housing policy for the Rwandan government. So any developer going into Rwanda basically has to follow those design guidelines. Now these are urban design guidelines covering and material guidelines, and a lot of research went into kind of bringing the cost down to absolute minimum, whilst ensuring good social cohesion within the development and ensuring scalability across all the provinces within Rwanda. Now, we're not talking about ultra high and ultra tall buildings over here. To get social cohesion, you need a maximum density of about 200 dwellings per hectare. So we were targeting about 90 dwellings per hectare in this case, and there were ground plus four levels basically high, so no lifts, easy to maintain. And this is a good model to kind of replace the informal settlements around that. So that there is a way to do this. And that was supported by the government in terms of incentives as well. So tax rebates, land provisions, those kind of rebates are essential in making these kind of developments happen, basically from those informal ones.
Okay, and then maybe one last question quickly.
Thank you. My name is Joe Akech, and I work with the Africa Urban Expansion Program, which of course we work very closely with various counties, because we have to have plans, we have to come up with strategic plan as to how we're going to expand, because we are expanding, a lot of people coming into the CBD, and within the next 10 years, where we're going to be. You know very well the population, the increase of the number of the people in Africa will be almost 800 million, and all of this will be going to the urban area. So are we ready for it? So my question is, and I'm happy you mentioned about the CBD, I happen to be the former mayor of Nairobi, and I work very, very close with you people. And I want to give my appreciation to Manu Chandaria, Chris Kirubi, because when we came up with how we can make this Nairobi to become a safe city, we came up with Mama Ngina Street. Being a Kenyan, I know you'll know where Mama Ngina Street. And that was the idea. And the financial contribution was done by Manu Chandaria and Chris Kirubi. Because at that time, we in City Hall, maybe we didn't have enough money, but they had to put over 100 million shillings. Now, coming back to what the lady just said, we're coming up with a low-cost housing, and I really appreciate what our president is doing, because low-cost housing is meant for the people within the slum area, the lower-cadre people. But at the same time, when you come up with the low-cost housing, you also have to provide other facilities like the edu schools, recreation centers, and so forth and so on. So that's another area where we may want you to come in and work very close, which I know you're working very close with Nairobi County. And I must say at this particular point that I really appreciate the work that the governor of Nairobi is doing, but he will need a lot of support with people like you, because when you come to the city of Nairobi at night, again, we want you people to come and talk to the CBD people. Nairobi becomes dark, not because of any particular reason, but we also want to have Nairobi to compete with other cities like what you're saying. We had a meeting at the University of Nairobi the other day. We were talking about the walking. Now, Kenyans don't have that culture of walking. They might have, but how is their safety? Okay? There's another area they're also saying. They're saying, Mr. Cage, Mayor, we want to walk, but are we safe to walk at 7 o'clock in the morning? Are we safe to walk in the evening hours? We people, you're talking of a 24 hours economy. Again, this is where you people, you'll have to sit down with the county, with the national government, and pave the way, because people have to sit down together in terms of coming up with a composition that can help this city. But I really appreciate the good work you guys are doing. It's just that I want you to incorporate, which I know you're doing already with Nairobi County. Let's make Nairobi to be a working city, just like what the governor is saying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks. That's a very useful point. Yes, Nairobi, I mean, I used to walk from State House Road down to Gill House, so I know, I've walked through the CBD many, many times. Areas next to Gill House, which are obviously transport hubs, need to be more pedestrianized. I think you'd appreciate that. Places like Upper Hill are dead at night as well. So we need to activate our spaces. The way to do that is mixed use, introducing mixed use. Upper Hill is primarily office buildings. There's no residential over there, so at night it just dies. So that kind of mixed use it's an easy way to kind of bring in activity. So you're kind of mixing in office, play, living, working, play, living, basically. As I think that's the tagline for Tatu, yeah. So mixing that all in and making it work. I think, yes, you will need a lot of goodwill from private developers to make this happen.
Can I just add a point? I think that's also a good segue towards night economy, because to encourage that, if we need to come up with the strategy that can already encourage the market and the private sector to shift their lens from running the business during the day, but also finding opportunities in the night. When Nairobi is blessed with a good weather, unlike ours in Dubai, where we have to actively think about different governance practices, different policy practices that can enable us to minimize our workload during the day. And with the shifting climate, I hope this is not the reality everywhere else, but unfortunately, this is where we are moving towards. So if we are not able to actively engage as a community, as a society during the daytime, how can we create our economy or shift our systems and practices in a way that we can also generate revenue and activity in the night, creating safety for the people? Because there's a phrase, eyes on the street. I mean, we also have to start designing with that lens. We also have to start planning with that lens and activating our streets naturally with the streets onto the eyes. That creates a sense of safety, and it's a perception that will create that ripple effect.
Great. Thanks for that final comment. Let's give our panel a round of applause.